Tonight we're setting sail into one of the weirdest corners of human evolution, the odd little traits your body still carries around, even though they stopped being useful a very long time ago. I'm talking about the biological leftovers, the evolutionary souvenirs, the parts of you that made perfect sense if you were a hairy tree-climbing mammal, but make slightly less sense when you're sitting in traffic trying to remember your email password. Because believe it or not, your body is not a perfectly engineered machine. It's more like an ancient house that's been renovated for a few million years. Some rooms are modern, some doors open into closets that used to be staircases, and somewhere in the basement there's a mysterious pipe nobody remembers installing, but everyone is afraid to remove. So before we begin tonight's peaceful tour through the strange museum of the human body, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy these sleepy history voyages. No pressure at all. And if you feel like it, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fun seeing people drifting off to sleep from all corners of the world. Now go ahead and dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Get comfortable, stretch out, adjust the pillow, and tuck your feet in just in case evolution forgot to remove something lurking under the bed. And let's pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered why you still get goosebumps, even though you barely have any fur left to puff up? Why babies instinctively grab things like tiny tree-climbing monkeys? Why your wisdom teeth show up years after your jaw already decided it was full? Why you hiccup like a startled frog after drinking water too quickly? Why some people sneeze the moment sunlight touches their face? Why your fingers wrinkle in water like tiny raisins, as if your body suddenly believes you're a damp fruit? And perhaps the strangest question of all, why your body still behaves like it's living in a jungle full of predators, even though the most dangerous thing you faced today was an email marked urgent? Well, tonight we're going to explore those strange leftovers, because your body's not just flesh and bone, it's a living museum, a collection of ancient survival tricks, outdated reflexes, and evolutionary experiments that somehow made it all the way to the present day. And now, congratulations, you've just woken up inside the long, ridiculous story of human evolution. Your body is millions of years old. Some of its features are brilliant, some are outdated, and a few seem to exist purely because evolution got distracted and never came back to finish the job. So settle in, because tonight we explore the odd human traits evolution forgot. You're standing outside on a chilly evening when suddenly your skin tightens and tiny bumps appear across your arms. Goosebumps, your body's dramatic attempt to puff up fur that you no longer really have. Millions of years ago, this reflex was extremely useful. Your mammalian ancestors were covered in thick hair, and when they felt cold or frightened, that fur would stand up, trapping heat and making them look bigger to predators. It was nature's version of a defensive winter jacket. Unfortunately, humans later misplaced most of that fur somewhere along the evolutionary timeline. The reflex, however, stayed behind, like a light switch that still works in a room that no longer exists. Now imagine the scene many thousands of generations ago. You're not standing in a parking lot outside a grocery store wondering if you forgot to buy milk. You're a small mammal living in a world that is absolutely packed with things that would enjoy eating you. The air is cold. The ground is damp. Somewhere in the darkness, something large and unfriendly is making rustling sounds. And suddenly your body activates its ancient defense system. Tiny muscles at the base of every hair contract. Your fur lifts upward, fluffing out like a living blanket. Warm air gets trapped close to your skin. At the same time, you appear larger to whatever predator might be evaluating you like a late-night snack. To a creature covered in thick fur, this trick works beautifully. To a modern human wearing a hoodie and holding a phone, it mostly just produces small bumps that make your arms look like undercooked chicken. but the machinery behind it is still there. Those tiny muscles are called erector pili. Each hair follicle has one, and every time you feel cold, scared, or sometimes moved by music, they contract automatically. You don't control it. Your body simply assumes that somewhere nearby there might be a saber-toothed cat evaluating your posture. So it prepares, even if the most dangerous predator in your immediate environment is a slightly aggressive house cat named Muffin. Let's talk about when goosebumps show up. Cold weather is the obvious one. The body tries to conserve heat, and the reflex still activates out of habit. It doesn't work particularly well anymore because humans traded their fur coats for sweaters sometime during the last few 100,000 years. But goosebumps also appear during emotional moments. Music, a powerful speech, a dramatic movie scene, or occasionally when someone brings you soup exactly when you needed soup. Scientists sometimes call this aesthetic chills. Your brain reacts strongly to emotional stimuli, and the nervous system activates the same ancient response. Somewhere deep inside your nervous system, a small prehistoric mammal is having a very intense moment. You can almost picture it. A creature about the size of a squirrel suddenly puffing up its fur while dramatic orchestral music plays. It is deeply moved and slightly confused. Interestingly, other animals still use this system exactly the way evolution intended. Cats puff their fur when frightened. Dogs raise the hair along their backs when they feel threatened. Porcupines. Well, porcupines take the concept to an extreme level that nobody argues with. Humans, on the other hand, simply get goosebumps during a particularly emotional episode of a historical documentary, which is evolution's way of saying, we kept the feature, but the context changed slightly. You might also notice goosebumps when someone scares you. Imagine walking through a dark hallway when suddenly a loud noise appears. Your skin tightens instantly. That reflex is tied to the fight or flight system, another deeply ancient survival program. Your nervous system releases signals preparing the body for action. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, and yes, your invisible fur prepares for intimidation. Again, you do not have enough fur left to intimidate anyone, but your body is trying its best. In a way, goosebumps are like a historical reenactment happening on your skin, a tiny reminder that long before warm houses and electric lighting, survival required a body full of clever little tricks. Some of them still work perfectly. Others, like goosebumps, mostly serve as evolutionary nostalgia. So the next time your arms suddenly erupt into goosebumps while listening to a powerful piece of music or stepping into cold air, just remember, your body is briefly reliving a moment from a time when fluffing your fur might have saved your life. These days, however, it mostly just means you might want a blanket. Let's begin with the coccyx, better known as the tailbone. It sits quietly at the base of your spine like a tiny historical monument to a tail you once had. Millions of years ago, early primates used their tails for balance while climbing through trees. A tail was helpful when your daily commute involved branches instead of office chairs. But as human ancestors began walking upright, the tail gradually shrank until only a small cluster of bones remained. Today the coccyx mostly exists to remind you that chairs were not designed with ancient primates in mind. Now picture yourself several million years ago. You're not sitting at a desk adjusting your posture because your back hurts after answering emails. Instead, you're moving through a dense forest canopy, climbing, balancing, leaping between branches. In that environment, a tail is incredibly useful. It acts like a counterweight when you climb. It helps you balance when you move along narrow branches. In some primates, it can even grasp things like an extra hand. For our ancient ancestors, a tail was not decoration. It was equipment. But something changed as our evolutionary path shifted. early human ancestors began spending more time on the ground. Walking upright gradually replaced climbing as the primary method of movement, and slowly, generation by generation, the tail became less necessary. Nature tends to remove things that are no longer useful, but evolution works slowly. Instead of disappearing overnight, the tail gradually shrank, vertebra by vertebra, until eventually all that remained was a small triangular bone at the base of the spine. That bone is your coccyx. If you could see your skeleton, you would notice that it looks like the final few segments of a tail that stopped growing halfway through the project, which, in a sense, is exactly what happened. Your coccyx is made of several fused vertebrae, tiny bones that once would have supported a flexible tail structure. Today it serves a different purpose. Muscles and ligaments attach there, helping support the pelvic floor, so it's not completely useless, but it is still unmistakably a remnant. An evolutionary footnote. Occasionally, very rarely, human babies are even born with small tail-like structures. These are known as vestigial tails. They're extremely uncommon, but they remind scientists that the genetic instructions for building a tail still exist somewhere deep inside our developmental blueprint. They're just usually switched off. Now let's talk about the coccyx in everyday life. You mostly notice it when something goes wrong, for example, slipping on ice, or sitting down too quickly on a hard chair, or attempting to sit comfortably during a very long meeting in a poorly designed chair. In those moments, the tailbone makes its presence known, suddenly, and usually with great enthusiasm. People who injure their coccyx quickly discover that sitting becomes a complex negotiation between physics and pain. It turns out that even though we no longer have tails, the leftover structure is still sensitive, which is nature's way of ensuring you never forget its existence. Interestingly, other primates kept their tails. Monkeys use them for balance while leaping between trees. Some species even have prehensile tails capable of gripping branches. If humans still had tails today, daily life might look slightly different. Office chairs would need redesigning. Pants would require a special tail opening. And emotional conversations might be slightly easier to read if everyone's tail gave away their mood. Instead, we have the coccyx, a tiny reminder that our ancestors once moved through forests using equipment we no longer carry. So the next time you shift uncomfortably in a chair and feel that faint awareness at the base of your spine, remember, you're sitting on the last surviving piece of a tail that helped your ancestors navigate the treetops. Evolution removed the tail, but it left the receipt. Now it's time to visit your jaw and meet the most awkward evolutionary leftovers of all, wisdom teeth. These molars once helped early humans chew tough plants, raw meat, and whatever else could be scraped off the landscape. Back then, larger jaws made space for extra grinding power, but over time, human skulls became smaller, while diets became softer. Unfortunately, the teeth never received the memo, so they still arrive fashionably late, pushing into already crowded mouths like guests who showed up after the house was full. Imagine the dinner menu of an early human. There are no forks, no ovens, no neatly sliced sandwiches. Instead, you are chewing fibrous roots, uncooked plants, nuts with stubborn shells, and meat that required a serious conversation before it became dinner. Your teeth are not just tools, they're your kitchen equipment, and for that kind of diet, extra molars are extremely helpful. Early humans and their ancestors had larger jaws with more space for teeth. The additional molars at the back, what we now call wisdom teeth, provided extra grinding surfaces. The tougher the food, the more valuable those teeth became. You could think of them as built-in food processors. But then something interesting happened. Human culture began changing faster than our anatomy. Cooking became more common, tools improved, food preparation softened the diet dramatically. Over thousands of generations, human jaws gradually became smaller. Faces flattened slightly as chewing demands decreased. But the genetic instructions for growing those extra molars were still present, and they were extremely punctual. Around the late teenage years or early adulthood, wisdom teeth attempt to emerge from the back of the jaw. The problem is simple. There is often no room left. Modern human mouths are already crowded with teeth. When the wisdom teeth arrive, they frequently find themselves trying to squeeze into a space that does not exist. Imagine arriving at a theatre where every seat is already taken, and deciding to sit down anyway. That is essentially the strategy of wisdom teeth. Sometimes they grow sideways. Sometimes they become trapped beneath the gums. Sometimes they push against neighbouring teeth like very determined house guests. Dentists refer to these situations as impacted wisdom teeth, which is a very calm way of describing a small dental traffic jam. Historically, before modern dentistry, impacted wisdom teeth could cause significant problems: infections, pain, swelling, and difficulty eating. Today, fortunately, dentists have tools and anesthesia, and a very firm opinion about removing them. For many people, the appearance of wisdom teeth leads to a scheduled appointment where those evolutionary leftovers are politely escorted out of the building. It is one of the few moments when modern medicine directly cleans up after evolution. Interestingly, not everyone grows wisdom teeth. Some people never develop them at all. Genetic variation is slowly reducing their presence in human populations. In other words, evolution may finally be phasing them out. It's just doing so at its usual leisurely pace, which means wisdom teeth will likely continue surprising teenagers for many generations to come. So the next time you hear someone mention wisdom tooth surgery, remember, those teeth were once extremely helpful. They allowed your ancestors to chew foods that would make modern grocery shoppers reconsider their life choices. But in today's world of soft bread and slow-cooked meals, they mostly serve as a reminder that the human body is still carrying equipment from an earlier era. Equipment that occasionally tries to install itself at the back of your mouth. Long after the available parking spaces are gone, imagine holding a newborn baby and gently placing your finger in their palm. Instantly, the tiny hand closes around it with surprising strength. This reflex is ancient. Long before strollers and cribs, primate infants needed to cling tightly to their parents' fur as they moved through trees. Falling out of a branch was not considered part of childhood development. So evolution equipped babies with hands ready to grab and hold. Today, the reflex still appears, even though modern babies are more likely to ride in car seats than tree branches. Now picture the environment of early primates. You're not walking on sidewalks. You're living in a forest canopy where the ground is far below, and gravity is not something to underestimate. Parents move through branches searching for food, carrying infants along the way, but their hands are often busy climbing, grasping bark, or reaching for fruit. So how does the baby stay safe and simple? The baby holds on. Primate infants evolved an incredibly strong gripping reflex. When their palm is touched, their fingers close automatically, forming a tight grasp. In species with thick fur, the infant clings directly to the parent's coat. The reflex activates instantly. No instructions required, no practice necessary. It is one of the earliest survival skills a primate baby possesses. Human babies still demonstrate this reflex shortly after birth. If you place your finger in their palm, they will grip it firmly. In fact, the grip can be surprisingly strong for such a tiny person. Doctors call this the palmar grasp reflex. It's a standard part of newborn development and usually fades after a few months as the nervous system matures. But for those early weeks, the reflex reveals a fascinating piece of evolutionary history. Your baby is performing a behavior that once helped keep infants safely attached to their parents, high above the forest floor. Today, of course, human parents do not have thick fur coats designed for infant climbing. Most modern babies would find it extremely difficult to cling to a winter jacket while their parent attempts to climb a tree. So the reflex has become more of a charming demonstration than a survival necessity. Still, it tells an incredible story. It shows that even in the earliest days of life, the human nervous system carries instructions written millions of years ago. You can almost imagine the ancient scenario. A primate parent moving carefully through branches while a tiny infant clings tightly to their fur, gripping with absolute determination. Meanwhile, the forest below waits patiently. Evolution did not leave much room for mistakes in that environment, so the grip reflex had to work perfectly. And it did. Even today, when you feel a newborn baby wrap their fingers around yours, you're witnessing a tiny echo of that ancient survival strategy. These days, however, the baby is much more likely to be gripping your finger while lying comfortably in a blanket, which is a considerable improvement over hanging from a branch during a windy afternoon. Now let's talk about hiccups, the sudden, mysterious body glitch that appears whenever you drink water too quickly. Scientists believe hiccups may be an ancient leftover from our distant aquatic ancestors. The movement resembles the way tadpoles control water flow across their gills while breathing, which means every time you hiccup, your body might briefly be reenacting a breathing technique from a time when your ancestors were tiny swimming creatures with ambitions. Picture the moment. You're peacefully drinking a glass of water. Everything is calm. And then suddenly your body makes a small explosive sound like a confused duck. Hic. Your diaphragm contracts involuntarily. Air rushes into your lungs and the vocal cords snap shut, creating that unmistakable sound. Hic. And once the process begins, it can repeat several times, often at the least convenient moments. Meetings, quiet rooms, moments when you're trying to appear calm and sophisticated. Hiccuping does not negotiate with these situations. But where does this strange reflex come from? Scientists have proposed several theories, but one of the most fascinating involves our distant evolutionary relatives, amphibians. In tadpoles, breathing involves moving water across the gills in a rhythmic pattern, controlled by neural circuits in the brainstem. The muscle movements in this process bear a striking resemblance to the hiccup reflex seen in humans. Some researchers believe that hiccups may be a leftover neurological pattern from a very early stage of vertebrate evolution. In other words, the circuitry that once helped ancient aquatic animals breathe through gills may still exist in modified form within our nervous system. Most of the time it stays quiet, but occasionally something triggers it. Rapid drinking, swallowing air, temperature changes in the stomach, and suddenly the ancient reflex activates. Your diaphragm contracts. Your throat snaps shut. Hic. It is a tiny neurological time machine, a brief moment when your body replays a movement pattern older than mammals themselves. Hiccups are particularly common in babies. In fact, infants hiccup frequently, sometimes even before birth while still in the womb. One theory suggests the reflex may help coordinate breathing muscles during early development, or it may simply be leftover wiring that hasn't been completely edited by evolution yet. The truth is that hiccups remain somewhat mysterious. Many home remedies exist. Holding your breath, drinking water upside down, being startled. None of these solutions are guaranteed, though many people swear by them, which means humans have been negotiating with hiccups for a very long time. But the next time you experience a stubborn round of hiccups, try not to be too annoyed. Instead, imagine a tiny amphibian ancestor somewhere deep in your evolutionary past, practicing the rhythmic breathing motions that helped it survive in ancient waters. Your body remembers, even if your brain would prefer it didn't. Segment 6. The appendix, the tiny organ with a complicated past. Deep inside your abdomen sits a narrow pouch called the appendix. For many years, doctors believed it was completely useless, like the spare button sewn inside a shirt that nobody ever actually uses. But the appendix has a long evolutionary history, and for our distant ancestors it may have played a much more important role. Long ago, early plant-eating mammals relied heavily on bacteria in their digestive systems to break down tough plant fibers. Structures similar to the appendix helped store and maintain those helpful microbes. Humans eventually shifted toward more varied diets, and the appendix shrank dramatically, becoming something of a biological leftover. So let's set the scene. It's time for dinner. But this is not the modern dinner where you debate between pasta or leftovers from yesterday's takeout. Instead, you're an ancient human ancestor wandering through a landscape where food is stubborn, fibrous, and determined not to be eaten easily. Imagine chewing leaves, tough roots, raw plants that feel like you're flossing with twigs. Breaking down that kind of food requires serious digestive teamwork. Your stomach does part of the job, but the real magic happens lower down, where armies of bacteria help break apart cellulose and other stubborn plant fibers. This is where structures like the appendix once played a role. Think of the appendix as a small biological safe house for helpful gut bacteria. If the digestive system experienced trouble, perhaps illness or infection that cleared out many of the microbes, the appendix could release stored bacteria to help repopulate the gut. It was a backup system, a tiny microbial bunker. For animals that lived on extremely plant-heavy diets, this feature could be quite useful. But human diets changed dramatically over time. Cooking softened food, tools allowed early humans to process plants and meat more efficiently. Diets diversified, fiber still mattered, but humans were no longer relying on massive fermentation systems to survive, and so the appendix gradually shrank. Evolution does not remove things quickly. It simply reduces them over many generations until they are smaller, quieter, and occasionally a bit awkward. The appendix became one of those awkward leftovers. For most of your life, you probably forget it exists. It sits quietly off to the side of your large intestine, about the size of a small finger. But occasionally it demands attention. Sometimes the opening to the appendix becomes blocked. Bacteria multiply inside the small pouch, and inflammation develops. This condition is known as appendicitis. Suddenly that tiny evolutionary relic becomes the center of a medical emergency. Pain develops in the lower right side of the abdomen. Doctors examine you, tests are ordered, and eventually someone says the words nobody wants to hear during a quiet evening. We're going to remove it. Fortunately, modern surgery handles this situation quite well. The appendix can be removed with minimal long-term consequences. Your digestive system continues working perfectly fine without it, which is a pretty strong hint that the appendix is no longer essential equipment. Interestingly, modern research suggests the appendix may still help maintain beneficial gut bacteria to some degree, so it might not be entirely useless after all. It's more like an outdated tool that occasionally performs a small helpful task. Imagine finding an old gadget in your garage that still works, but you're not entirely sure what problem it was originally meant to solve. That's the appendix. It's a relic from a time when your digestive system had to deal with far more stubborn plant material than the average grocery store salad. So the next time you hear someone mention their appendix, remember that deep inside your abdomen sits a tiny organ that once helped your ancestors survive on diets that would make modern teeth and stomachs file a complaint. These days it mostly just hangs around quietly. but like many evolutionary leftovers, it occasionally reminds us that the human body is full of stories from a very different past. Many animals can rotate their ears like small radar dishes, turning them towards sounds with impressive precision. If you've ever watched a cat suddenly swivel its ears toward a faint noise across the room, you've seen this system in action. Humans technically still have the muscles required to move their ears, but they've mostly forgotten how to use them. The muscles are still there, quietly attached around the outer ear, but for most people they no longer respond strongly enough to produce visible movement. Let's talk about hearing in the wild. Imagine living in a dense forest where visibility is limited and danger rarely announces itself politely. You might not see a predator approaching, but you might hear a twig snap, a rustle in the leaves, or the quiet footstep of something large and interested in your lunch plans. In that world, hearing is extremely important. Many mammals evolved the ability to move their ears independently. Small muscles surrounding the ear allow the outer ear to rotate toward a sound source. This helps capture sound waves more efficiently and determine the direction they're coming from. It's like having built-in satellite dishes on both sides of your head. Cats are excellent examples of this system. Their ears can rotate dramatically, sometimes independently of each other, allowing them to track tiny sounds with remarkable accuracy. Dogs also use this ability. When a dog hears something interesting, its ears tilt forward, back or sideways to gather more information. Now let's look at humans. If you hear a noise behind you, what do? You turn your head. That's our version of ear rotation. Humans still possess the auricular muscles that once helped move the ears. These include small muscles with names that sound slightly dramatic, like the anterior auricular muscle and the posterior auricular muscle. But over time, these muscles became weaker as our reliance on ear movement decreased. Humans developed excellent neck mobility and strong visual processing instead. Rather than rotating the ears, we simply rotate the head, which works quite well, although it does occasionally lead to awkward moments when someone calls your name in a meeting and you spin around like a startled owl. Interestingly, some people can still wiggle their ears. If you're one of those rare individuals, congratulations. You have partial control over muscles that most people forgot existed. For everyone else, those muscles remain mostly inactive, like retired employees quietly sitting in the background. They're still part of the anatomy. They just don't do much anymore. This is what scientists call a vestigial trait, a feature that once had a function in ancestral species, but has lost most of its original purpose over time. Your ear muscles are essentially leftovers from a time when tracking sounds required more mechanical assistance. Back then, turning your ears toward a rustle in the grass might have helped you detect danger more quickly. Today, the most common sound you're tracking is probably your phone buzzing across the room, and for that, turning your head works just fine. So while your ears may no longer swivel dramatically like those of a curious fox, the quiet presence of those tiny muscles tells a story about your evolutionary past. Your body once came equipped with adjustable sound receivers. Now they mostly just hold your ears in place while your neck does the heavy lifting. You're sitting quietly when someone nearby yawns. Within seconds you feel the urge yourself. Your mouth stretches open, your lungs fill with air, and suddenly you're yawning too. This strange phenomenon, known as contagious yawning, has puzzled scientists for years. Why should simply seeing another person yawn trigger the same reaction in your own body? One theory suggests that the reflex is tied to empathy and social bonding, ancient mechanisms that helped human groups coordinate behavior, including sleep cycles. Let's imagine a small group of early humans gathered around a campfire at the end of a long day. The sun has set. The forest grows quiet. The air cools slightly as the evening settles in. One member of the group yawns, another notices, and within moments several others begin yawning too. This might seem like a trivial coincidence, but synchronized behavior can actually be useful for social animals. If members of a group begin resting around the same time, it becomes easier to coordinate sleep schedules and maintain safety. Some individuals remain alert while others sleep, then the roles rotate. Shared rhythms help maintain group stability. Yawning itself may also play a role in regulating brain temperature and oxygen levels, although the exact mechanics are still debated. What's especially interesting is that contagious yawning appears to be connected to social awareness. People are more likely to catch a yawn from someone they know or feel emotionally connected to. Friends, family members, and close companions tend to trigger stronger responses than strangers. Even seeing a yawn in a video can set it off, which means if you just yawned while listening to this, you're not alone. Animals show similar behavior. Some primates, dogs, and other social species display contagious yawning, particularly within familiar groups. This suggests that the reflex may be linked to the brain's mirror neuron system, networks that help us understand and imitate the actions of others. These systems support empathy, learning, and cooperation. In other words, yawning together may be one of the many subtle ways social animals stay connected. Now imagine how useful this might have been thousands of years ago. A group preparing to rest would benefit from subtle signals that the body was transitioning towards sleep. Yawning spreads that signal quietly, without words. It's the prehistoric equivalent of everyone agreeing that it might be time to call it a night. Today, the same reflex still exists. Except now it often appears during long meetings, late-night television, or the moment someone else yawns in a waiting room. Your brain sees the signal and decides to join the activity. No discussion required. It's a tiny reminder that humans evolved not just as individuals, but as members of closely connected social groups. Even something as simple as a yawn can reveal the quiet ways our brains remain tuned to each other. And if you happen to yawn again right now, well, your ancient social instincts are simply doing their job. Some people step into bright sunlight and immediately sneeze. Scientists call this the photic sneeze reflex. Roughly a quarter of the human population experiences it, yet its exact cause remains somewhat mysterious. When bright light hits the eyes, signals travel through the optic nerve toward the brain. For reasons that are not entirely understood, those signals sometimes interfere with nearby nerve pathways involved in sneezing. Picture the moment. You leave a dim room and step outside into brilliant sunlight. Your eyes squint. Your brain processes the sudden brightness. And then, unexpectedly, a sneeze erupts. It can happen once, or several times in a row. And if you're holding something fragile, it may produce a brief moment of surprise. The photic sneeze reflex has fascinated scientists for generations. It appears to be inherited, meaning it often runs in families. One popular explanation involves a small wiring mix-up in the nervous system. The optic nerve carries visual information from the eyes to the brain. Nearby lies the trigeminal nerve, which controls facial sensations and is heavily involved in triggering sneezes. In some individuals, strong signals from the optic nerve may accidentally stimulate parts of the trigeminal nerve. The brain receives mixed messages. Bright light arrives, and the body responds as if something tickled the inside of the nose. Bless you. Interestingly, this reflex doesn't seem to provide any clear survival advantage. It may simply be an example of how complex biological systems sometimes overlap in unexpected ways. Think of it like two wires crossing slightly inside the control panel. Most of the time everything works normally, but occasionally sunlight presses the sneeze button. Despite its mysterious origins, the photic sneeze reflex has been documented for centuries. Ancient Greek philosophers even wrote about sneezing in sunlight, long before neuroscience existed to attempt explanations. So if you're someone who sneezes whenever you walk into bright daylight, you're participating in a long historical tradition of confused noses. Fortunately, the reflex is usually harmless, though it can create slightly awkward moments when stepping outside during allergy season, when it becomes difficult to determine which sneeze is responsible. Either way, your nervous system has simply decided that sunlight deserves a dramatic greeting. After spending time in water, your fingertips wrinkle like tiny raisins. For years, people assumed this happened because the skin absorbed water and swelled. But scientists later discovered something more interesting. The wrinkles are actually controlled by the nervous system. Blood vessels beneath the skin constrict, pulling the surface into ridged patterns. These wrinkles may help improve grip on wet objects, acting like tiny traction treads. Imagine standing beside a river thousands of years ago. You reach into the water to pick up smooth stones or slippery fish. Without good traction, objects easily slide from your hands. But after a few minutes in the water, something subtle happens. Your fingertips wrinkle. Those ridges create channels that help water flow away from the skin surface, increasing friction between your fingers and whatever you're holding. It's the biological equivalent of adding tread to a tire. Modern experiments support this idea. People with wrinkled fingers often perform better when gripping wet objects compared to smooth fingertips. So the next time your fingers wrinkle in the bath, your body may actually be activating a very old tool designed to help you handle slippery environments. Of course, these days the most common wet object you're gripping is probably a bar of soap that still manages to escape dramatically across the floor. Evolution provided the traction. Bathroom tiles provided the chaos. Still, it's remarkable that something as ordinary as wrinkled skin reveals another clever adaptation hidden within the human body. A small reminder that even the simplest physical changes often carry echoes of ancient survival challenges. You may not look like a woolly mammoth, but your body still grows hair in surprising places. Long ago, thick hair helped regulate temperature and protect skin. Over time, humans lost most of that covering, but the follicles remained active, sometimes in locations nobody requested. Let's begin with a simple observation. Humans are technically mammals, and mammals are, by definition, creatures with hair. Lots of it. If you could travel back several million years and meet your distant ancestors, you would not need a jacket. Their bodies were covered in thick fur designed to trap heat, protect skin from the sun, and provide a layer of insulation against wind and cold. Hair was essential survival equipment. Imagine waking up early in the morning on the ancient savanna. The air is cool, the ground is still damp with dew. Your body heat escapes quickly into the chilly air, but that coat of fur helps trap warmth close to the skin. It's nature's sleeping bag. Hair also protects against sunlight. Long before sunscreen, fur acted as a natural shield against harsh rays during long days outdoors. It even helped with small irritations like insects, creating a barrier between biting bugs and delicate skin. In other words, hair was extremely useful. Then something changed. As human ancestors began evolving different lifestyles, body hair gradually became less necessary. Humans developed sweat glands that helped regulate body temperature more efficiently during long-distance walking and running. Less fur meant sweat could evaporate more easily, cooling the body during physical activity. This was a major advantage. Imagine chasing prey across open landscapes under the hot sun. A thick fur coat would trap heat, but a body that can sweat and cool itself effectively can keep moving longer. Over thousands of generations, human bodies slowly lost much of their dense hair covering. But here's the interesting part. The hair follicles never disappeared. Most humans still have roughly the same number of hair follicles as other primates. The difference is that many of our hairs became much thinner and lighter, tiny strands known as vellus hair. You can see them if sunlight catches your arm at the right angle, a soft, almost invisible fuzz. Evolution didn't fully remove our fur, it just turned down the volume. Of course, some areas of the body still produce thicker hair. The scalp protects the head from sunlight and helps regulate heat around the brain. Eyebrows and eyelashes protect the eyes by redirecting sweat and debris. And then there are other places where hair appears, with a level of enthusiasm that can feel slightly excessive. Noses, ears, chins, backs. Sometimes these follicles seem to behave like enthusiastic employees who misunderstood the assignment. But even those hairs once had purposes. Nasal hair, for example, filters dust and particles from the air you breathe. Eyelashes trigger protective blinking when something approaches the eye. Even arm hair helps with sensory detection. Tiny movements in the hair can alert the nervous system when something brushes against the skin. It's a subtle alarm system, so while humans may no longer resemble walking carpets of fur, the legacy of our hairy ancestors remains quietly embedded in our biology. Your body is still running a slightly modified version of the original mammalian design, which explains why, every once in a while, you look in the mirror and discover a hair growing somewhere that absolutely nobody ordered. Evolution, it seems, is still working through a few details. Just as you begin drifting into sleep, your body sometimes jolts awake with a sudden twitch. This phenomenon is called a hypnic jerk. One theory suggests the reflex developed when primates slept in trees. If the body relaxed too quickly, the brain might panic and trigger a muscle contraction, just in case you were about to fall out of a branch. Picture the moment. You're lying comfortably in bed. The lights are off. Your mind begins drifting between thoughts and dreams. Muscles slowly relax as your body prepares for sleep. Then suddenly, your leg kicks, or your arm jerks, or your entire body twitches as if someone briefly unplugged gravity. And you wake up for a moment, slightly confused. Welcome to the hypnic jerk. Scientists believe this reflex may be linked to ancient survival instincts. Long before beds and pillows, many primates slept in trees. Branches provided safety from ground predators, but they also introduced a new problem: falling. If a sleeping primate relaxed too deeply, it might slip from its perch. That would be a very unpleasant way to end the evening, so the brain evolved a quick emergency response. As the body relaxed into sleep, the nervous system monitored muscle tone and balance. If something felt wrong, if the brain sensed the possibility of falling, it could trigger a sudden contraction of muscles. A quick jolt, just enough to wake you and readjust your position. You can imagine an ancient primate nodding off on a branch when suddenly the brain says, "Hold on a second, are we about to fall?" And the body responds with a quick kick to stabilize. Problem solved. Modern humans rarely sleep in trees anymore. Our biggest nighttime risk is usually rolling over onto a pillow at an odd angle, but the reflex remains. Hypnic jerks often occur when the brain transitions between wakefulness and sleep. Stress, fatigue, caffeine, or irregular sleep schedules can make them more common. They are harmless, though occasionally surprising. Some people even experience the sensation of falling during the moment before the jerk occurs, as if the brain briefly imagined losing balance, which might be the mind replaying a scenario that once mattered very much. So the next time your body suddenly twitches just as you're about to fall asleep, try not to be annoyed. Instead, picture a sleepy primate perched high in a tree many thousands of years ago, relying on that quick reflex to avoid an unexpected midnight descent. Your body remembers the possibility, even if your bed is safely 2 feet off the ground. In complete silence, your brain often becomes restless. Ancient humans evolved in environments filled with constant background noise, wind moving through trees, insects buzzing, distant animal calls. Silence could signal danger. Even today, the brain sometimes becomes uneasy when the world grows too quiet. Imagine the nighttime environment of early human communities. There are no electric lights, no air conditioners humming quietly, no distant traffic. The world is dark and sound carries easily through the night air. Normally there is always something to hear. Crickets chirping, wind rustling leaves, small animals moving through brush. These sounds create a kind of natural soundtrack that reassures the brain everything is functioning normally. But if that background noise suddenly stops, that's when the brain pays attention. Silence in nature can signal that something large has entered the area. Predators moving nearby often cause smaller animals to become quiet. In those moments, the absence of sound becomes information. Your brain learns to notice that change. Thousands of years later, that same sensitivity remains. Many people find complete silence uncomfortable, especially when trying to sleep. Without some kind of background noise, the brain becomes hyper-aware of small sounds, a creaking floorboard, a distant car, the hum of electricity in the walls. This heightened awareness once helped our ancestors detect threats. Today, it mostly makes us wonder if the refrigerator just made a suspicious noise. That's why gentle background sounds, fans, rain, ocean waves, often feel calming. They recreate the consistent natural noise that the brain expects. It signals that the environment is stable, safe, predictable. So if you ever find yourself turning on a fan or playing quiet ambient noise before sleep, you're not just creating comfort, you're satisfying an ancient expectation built into the human nervous system. Your brain simply prefers a soundtrack. Total silence feels suspicious. Your brain reacts strongly to sugar because it once represented a rare and valuable energy source. Sweet fruits helped early humans survive when food was scarce. Unfortunately, the modern world now produces sugar at industrial levels, which your ancient brain interprets as a miracle. Let's travel back to a time when finding food required effort. You wake up hungry. There are no refrigerators, no grocery stores, no convenient snack shelves waiting nearby. Food must be gathered, hunted, or discovered, and one of the most valuable foods you might encounter is ripe fruit. Sweetness is nature's signal that a fruit contains energy-rich sugars. These calories are extremely valuable when meals are unpredictable. So the human brain evolved to respond enthusiastically to sweet flavors. When you taste sugar, reward circuits in the brain activate. Dopamine releases. The experience feels pleasurable. Your brain is essentially saying, "Excellent discovery. Please remember where this food came from." In ancient environments, this system worked beautifully. Sweet foods were seasonal and limited. Enjoying them helped store energy for times when food was harder to find. But modern food production changed the equation. Sugar is now everywhere. Cakes, cookies, drinks, sauces, breakfast foods that contain enough sweetness to qualify as dessert. And your brain still reacts as if you've discovered a rare fruit tree after days of wandering through the wilderness. It celebrates enthusiastically. The system never anticipated a world where sugar would appear in nearly every aisle of the supermarket. So when you feel an irresistible pull towards something sweet, remember that your brain is following instructions written during a time when those calories could make the difference between hunger and survival. Your taste buds are simply celebrating a discovery that, in the distant past, truly mattered. Your brain is extremely good at detecting movement in dim light. This ability helped early humans survive in predator-filled environments. Sometimes the brain still reacts to harmless shadows, as if something dangerous might be hiding there. Imagine walking through a forest at dusk. Light fades quickly, shapes blur together. The brain must work harder to interpret what it sees. In these conditions, it is better for the brain to overreact than underreact. If a shadow might be a predator, responding quickly increases survival chances. So the human visual system evolved to detect subtle movements and shapes in low light. Your brain constantly scans for patterns that resemble living creatures. A sudden movement in the corner of your vision, a shape that looks slightly different from the surrounding darkness. Even today, this system remains active. You might notice it when walking through a dark room or seeing something move slightly in the corner of your eye. Often the brain realizes moments later that the shape was harmless. A curtain moving, a shifting shadow, a coat hanging on a chair. But for a brief moment the ancient alarm system activates. Better safe than eaten, which was an extremely effective survival policy for most of human history. Blushing is one of the strangest human reactions. When you feel embarrassed, blood rushes to your face automatically. Scientists believe this response evolved as a social signal, showing others that you recognize a mistake. Unfortunately, the signal is extremely honest and completely impossible to turn off. Let's talk about embarrassment. Not the mild kind where you mispronounce a word and move on with your life. I mean the deep, unmistakable kind where your brain suddenly replays something awkward you said 5 years ago while you're trying to fall asleep. That feeling. Now imagine that moment happening in front of a group of people. Your brain realizes you've made a mistake. Maybe you said something foolish. Maybe you misunderstood a situation. Maybe you waved back at someone who wasn't actually waving at you. Your brain reacts instantly. And before you can do anything about it, your face begins to turn red. Warm. Very warm. Like someone quietly turned up the thermostat inside your cheeks. This reaction is called blushing, and it's one of the few emotional responses humans cannot easily hide. The nervous system sends signals that widen the blood vessels in your face, allowing more blood to flow through the skin. The result is visible redness. And while it may feel deeply inconvenient during awkward moments, scientists believe blushing actually serves an important social purpose. Imagine early human communities where cooperation was essential. People relied on trust, shared resources, and stable relationships within their group. When someone made a mistake or behaved in a socially inappropriate way, acknowledging that mistake quickly could help repair the situation. Blushing acts as a kind of automatic apology. It tells everyone around you that you recognize the awkwardness and feel appropriately embarrassed about it. You're signaling sincerity. Your brain is essentially saying, yes, that was unfortunate, and I am fully aware of it. Because the reaction is involuntary, it's also very difficult to fake. You can pretend not to care, but blushing reveals your true emotional state. In social groups, this honesty may have helped maintain trust. If someone accidentally offended another person but visibly showed embarrassment, the group could see that the mistake wasn't intentional. Blushing helps smooth over social bumps. Of course, modern life has introduced situations that the original system probably did not anticipate. Job interviews, public speaking, accidentally replying all to an email. Your ancient social alarm system activates just as strongly for these events as it would have for awkward moments around a campfire thousands of years ago. Which means blushing occasionally appears at exactly the moment you would prefer it not to. But in a strange way, blushing is also a sign of emotional intelligence. People who blush easily often show strong awareness of social dynamics and the feelings of others. Your brain is deeply tuned to group relationships. So the next time your face warms up during an embarrassing moment, remember that your body is activating an ancient social signal designed to keep human communities cooperative and peaceful. It's just a little inconvenient that the signal is so visible. And now, after a long and slightly strange journey through the museum of the human body, the day is finally coming to an end. you've discovered that your body is not just a modern machine designed for comfortable living. It's a collection of ancient survival tools, some of them brilliant, some of them outdated, and some that still activate at the most inconvenient possible moments, like hiccuping during a quiet room or sneezing dramatically the second you step into sunlight. Over millions of years, your ancestors survived forests, deserts, ice ages, predators, famine, and the occasional extremely questionable dinner. And every one of those generations passed down tiny pieces of biological wisdom. Goosebumps that once fluffed thick fur against the cold. A tailbone that remembers the days when balance meant gripping branches high above the ground. A craving for sugar that once helped people survive lean seasons. Muscles that twitch at night because somewhere deep inside your brain still thinks you might fall out of a tree. Even something as simple as wrinkled fingertips or contagious yawning carries a small story from the past. Your body remembers things your mind never experienced. It carries instructions written long before cities, electricity, or comfortable mattresses. And somehow, through millions of years of change, those ancient systems are still quietly running in the background. So tonight, as you settle into a clean bed with soft blankets, warm air, and a roof that keeps out the rain, maybe take a moment to appreciate how far things have come. Your ancestors slept on cold ground, listening carefully for predators in the darkness. They relied on instincts and reflexes just to make it through the night. And yet those same instincts helped build the world you live in now. A world where the most dangerous thing you might encounter before sleep is accidentally reading one more email. History may be messy, uncomfortable, and occasionally ridiculous, but it's also proof that humans are stubbornly resilient creatures who adapt, improvise, and keep going, even when evolution leaves a few odd design choices behind. And now it's time for your brain to do what it was designed to do after a long day. Slow down, let your breathing become steady, let your muscles relax. Let all those ancient survival systems take a well-earned break. The forest is quiet, the fire is low, and for tonight at least, everything is safe. So close your eyes, drift off gently, and let sleep carry you peacefully into the next chapter of the story. Good night.